You may have heard that weightlifting is overrated for climbers, and there's definitely some people in the climbing community that think that weightlifting is not worth their time. In this video, we're going to make a case for why weightlifting is useful for every single climber. We're going to first look at the 5 benefits of weightlifting for climbing. Then we're going to look at how to get into weightlifting if you have not done it before. And if you are already weightlifting, the final section of this video, we're going to look at how to avoid the dreaded plateau. Feel free to skip ahead to the section that you feel is most relevant to you. The first benefit of weightlifting for climbing is it's going to build sport-specific strength. So it is going to be performance enhancing. Now I'm going to kind of breeze over this point because I think most people will agree or understand that strength is beneficial to climbing. However, I think one of the most important points about this, which is interesting to think about, is that strength training can help you develop and diversify your skills towards certain different styles of climbing. So if the argument is that I only want to climb for enjoyment because climbing is fun, strength training can help you climb in a wide variety of styles. There's lots of exercises which can help you develop your skills, help you improve your technique, and mean you can climb more of the fun stuff and access more of your gym. The second one is often a good enough reason for pretty much everyone to engage in strength training regardless of all the other benefits, and this is improving your longevity in climbing and reducing your injury risk. There's plenty of evidence to support the idea that strength training reduces your injury risk. If we look at this one study, for example, a meta-analysis with over 7,000 participants and over 170 injuries recorded, we can see that the finding is clear. There is a dose-response relationship with strength training. That meaning the more strength training you're doing, the more it's reducing your risk to injury. Essentially what we're trying to do is increase the strength of the tissues relevant to our sport. This increases the threshold at which those tissues are susceptible to injury. These same researchers published another meta-analysis which looked at multiple different injury prevention programs. And once again, strength training comes out on top as the most effective way to prevent injuries within your sport. Strength training reduced injuries to less than 1/3. So if you are looking for the simplest and most time-efficient way to try and prevent injuries within climbing, strength training is probably the best solution you can take. On this channel, we often get questions about how this training advice and content will relate to an older climber. And the good news is that it's fairly simple here. It's exactly the same, if not even more important, that the older population is engaging in strength training to help prevent injuries, but also an age-related decline in muscle mass, muscle strength, and bone mineral density. This is particularly important to postmenopausal women when osteoporosis tends to speed up due to a hormone change. It is shown in evidence that strength training will reduce this decline, and it's still possible if you're engaging in strength training for the first time to even increase muscle mass, strength, and bone mineral density. The evidence suggests the best way to do this is weight-bearing or impact-loaded exercises like jumping or weightlifting like back squats and deadlifts. Essentially, you still need to be working at a high intensity to see the adaptations within the muscle and bone. This might correspond to a 75 to 80% of your 1 repetition max, which is a good recommendation for any age. The fourth big benefit of strength training is that it can increase your confidence and your mental toughness. Our friend Emil said that his #1 tip to improve performance was learn how to try hard. This helps him get the most out of every session. You've got more, come on, go, 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 go. However, try hard is a skill in itself, and a good way to do that, we think, is with strength training, because the movements themselves can be relatively simple and you can put all of your focus and attention into just picking up a weight or moving a weight up and down. Many of these lifts are really safe once you've learned good technique, and this is a great way to refine your try hard. Our last major benefit of strength training is that it's really good for enjoyment and motivation. Particularly with strength training, there's lots of different exercises and new skills to learn, and when you're climbing or another exercise starts to feel like it plateaus, you can always find some way to look for progression within your strength training. For many, this is where a huge amount of motivation comes from. Often when you start to see something increase or you see those numbers go up, this keeps you turning up, it will keep you more consistent, and as we know, consistency is king. So if you think you can get some benefit from strength training, how do you get started? Here is a 6-point checklist which will help you get started with your strength training for climbing. #1 is to start with an exercise or a list of exercises which you think you're going to really enjoy, you're going to be really interested in mastering, or will be really relevant to what you want to improve on in your climbing. This is all about motivation and consistency. I would personally trade an exercise which is the ideal fit for the adaptation in which you want for your climbing, for an exercise which you think you're going to enjoy and do much more consistently. This is because the benefits of strength training go beyond just being a performance enhancing tactic. And ultimately, the exercise you do is the exercise that's going to benefit your climbing. For me personally, all of my strength and conditioning exercises I do at home outside of my climbing sessions, because this is how I fit it into my schedule. You might also hear that you should avoid exercises that are really highly skill-based. For example, like Olympic lifting. In fact, we probably said that this can be a bit of a time sink, or even if it's just more of a calisthenics skill, they might not have the same transfer to your climbing. But if you really enjoy learning that skill, then it might be something that you're going to stay consistent with. Number 2 is to start at a level that you can master really quickly, or that you can build up volume with relatively quickly as well. An example of this might be the one-arm pull-up or the one-arm lock-off. This is a very high-level exercise. It's going to take a lot of strength to do. And a lot of climbers won't be able to start doing one-arm lock-offs straight away, and will need to find a more appropriate exercise. So if you can't hold a one-arm lock-off comfortably for at least 5 seconds, I'd recommend that you start with a two-arm variation, or you start with exercises like normal pull-ups or bicep curls to strengthen these tissues. These exercises will start the journey towards the goal that you want to achieve, but along the way be building up that tissue resilience that we know is important for injury prevention. Number 3 is keep a log of the training you're doing and try to do it at least once a week. This is a good minimum frequency I would suggest for a lot of strength training exercises, and for many things you might be building up to 2 or maybe even 3 times a week if the intensity is not that high. The training log is beneficial for a lot of things, which is just going to include things like learning how to apply progressive overload, but also keeping up your motivation and seeing a history of what you've done. This is a really good way to track your progression, and for a lot of people, the progress is what really drives motivation. Number 4 is similar to the previous one, and this is to set goals. Goal setting is a really motivating part of training, but again, it's also going to mean that you keep track of how far you've come, and it's also going to help you progress to the next level or change up exercises when you achieve a goal. Number 5 is accessibility. So this is a really important one. It's also very linked to consistency. I previously mentioned that a lot of the strength and conditioning I do is always done at home, and that's because it's super accessible to me and I don't really have an excuse to get in the way of my training. This is why I think every serious climber should have a hangboard at home, or if they can't set up a hangboard, have a lifting edge. Training your fingers is obviously one of the best things you can do in terms of strength training for climbing, and if you can set this up at home, you have no excuse for consistency. And particularly with hangboarding, it should be done over years, not over months and weeks. Start this journey with a friend so that you can build off each other's energy, and they can keep you consistent when your motivation is lacking. A quick bonus point here, which applies to certain exercises when we're talking about weightlifting, would be to seek professional advice for technique guidance. So particularly things like heavy compound lifts or Olympic lifts. They are really complex, and if you can get in-person advice on how to do these, it will not only make you feel safer and more confident, it will improve your technique and how much you can lift. The more weight you can lift, the better strength training benefits you're going to get. So if you're convinced that strength training is the bee's knees and you've already started, what you'll be concerned with now is how to avoid a plateau. If you can cover these 5 points, you'll be well on your way to long-term progression and skipping any plateaus that get in the way. This first one is really important for avoiding that plateau that often occurs around the 6 to 8 week mark on any new strength training program. That is to start slowly and not to overdo it in the first few weeks. The easy trap here is to get really motivated by something and start operating at that 95–100% intensity immediately. We see this all the time with hangboarding programs. Smart programming will include a 2 to 3 week lead in any new program where the intensity is reduced and you're really just becoming familiar with the exercises themselves. This is really important for more complex exercises where there's a high skill level to them and you need to learn the technique. And in fact, learning the technique in this familiarization phase was a recommendation of the first research paper we mentioned in this video. Number 2 is to plan progressive overload. So this is increasing your training either via the intensity or the volume. You can do both of these, but I would be cautious about doing both at the same time. You can alternate between pushing the volume of an exercise and then pushing the intensity of an exercise. It's good to plan this in advance, but if you're doing your own training program, make sure that you're able to auto-regulate this, which means being being adaptable to how hard you're pushing an exercise, even being able to pull back on the intensity of the volume at certain times based on your internal feedback and your perception of difficulty. This means that you will balance your training and recovery and not push too far into non-functional overreaching. If your exercise is really highly skill-based, you can also think about increasing the frequency of this. So for example, taking it from 2 times a week to 3 times a week. Number 3 is know when to adapt an exercise. There are multiple ways and strategies to modify an exercise to help you keep progressing, and this can be in the form of deficits, it could be changing the tempo, it could be isometrics or pause reps, it could be using cluster sets, or it could be introducing more stability into an exercise, like moving from a TRX to a bench press, for example. With all of these, the core goal of the exercise remains the same, but you're finding ways to introduce more variation into it, and this can be a really powerful way to keep pushing progression. Number 4 is try hard. With a lot of exercise, a high level of intent and effort is required, particularly with high velocity exercises or plyometric exercises, where the speed or height of an exercise is mostly dependent on how hard you try. This one is less easily quantified, but if there's any fear or apprehension behind an exercise, then it's almost certain that you won't be trying really hard. If that's the case, think about why you're not trying really hard, and if there's a better suited exercise for you which won't have this impact. The final point is to take a break. In many cases, if you've been training an exercise for a really long time, a short break away from it just to either get more recovery or increase your motivation for the exercise can be a really nice way to push your progress. We've covered a lot about training theory and concepts, but you might be wondering what are the good exercises or best exercises to actually include for me. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but if you head over to our YouTube channel and check out our Training Fundamentals series, you'll see a good selection of videos with lots of ideas about exercises that we think are useful for climbing.